Now I'm going to demonstrate grasp the sparrow's tail coming out of repulse monkey from the front view. So we're finishing repulse monkey in this position with the left foot forward. Then we're going to move into the carry the ball position. And in the form that I learned, the carry the ball position here is going to be a vertical carry the ball rather than a horizontal carry the ball. We're going to step out into a shoulder width stance. We're going to roll the forward arm up so the palm is facing the head. And then we're going to shift forward, and this is ward off. Then we're going to rotate the body all the way to the left, which is a transitional moment before we begin roll back, where we shift the weight all the way back to the rear leg. And then we're going to do another transitional movement, circling the arms up. So the palm of the right hand is going to attach to the wrist of the left hand. Then we're going to press forward. And then we're going to begin push, which occurs in 3 phases. First, we push to open the arms in front parallel. Then we push down and back. And then we push up and forward. And then to turn around, we're going to shift the weight back, dropping the palms parallel to the ground. And then we're going to rotate all the way around and then start the motion in the opposite side with the vertical carry the ball, step out onto the heel. Now, if you're familiar with a popular version of grasp the sparrow's tail that mostly you'll see if you're watching it on the internet, you'll see the push occur in a slightly different manner than in the school where I learned, or the system where I learned. And I'll just demonstrate that so you don't get confused here. So from the carry the ball, we step out, we do ward off in this manner, which is a little bit different than another technique where people do ward off from the carry the ball horizontal position and they do ward off in that manner. Don't worry about those details. It is a different school doing that, so slightly different technique, but we're still doing it all the correct way. So we step out on the heel, roll up in the vertical position with the hands, ward off and roll back, press, and then push is going to occur here, and then you'll commonly see the second and third part of push look like this, where we shift back and the arms drop back to the body and then push forward. In the school where I learned, it was taught that that's not a very martial way of doing it, having your arms come back in this very non-defensive position versus sticking to the opponent and pushing down in this fashion. But if we're doing this for Tai Chi, for health and for understanding about how the core moves, both are correct. They're just using a different technique. And if you study the Tai Chi Code, and I'll probably explain this a little bit today, this motion here where we push down and back is in fact push, using the trigram theory that I have for the Tai Chi Code of push. This core movement as we push down this way is the exact same but mirror image of this movement when we are pushing forward. I'll explain the core energies in a few minutes. When we do this motion here, this is actually the same core movement as press, not push. You see the ankle dorsiflex here, the forefoot coming off the ground. It's actually the same core movement as when we step out onto the heel. That actually, in the Tai Chi Code core techniques, is the press core movement. So for the sake of this lesson in Grasp the Sparrow's Tail, we are doing the push movement and then push forward. So I'll start right there explaining the core mechanics with push. So in push, you're going to see the same motion. When we did brush knee, that is a push. When we're doing push in the Tai Chi Code mechanical theory, we're using our glutes on the standing leg or the active leg to push the body forward, and the waist muscles are going to align like this. The upper waist is turning away from the extending hip, which is why my right hand is pushing forward, and my lower waist or the lower abs are turning back towards the extending hip. So that is a spiral rotation of the waist occurring as we do this push. This is a pretty easy posture to adapt to feel that motion. Feel the glutes pushing back. Feel your arm being reached forward from the upper waist going forward on that same side. And then you can feel your belly button going back on that side. The lower abs also tuck the pelvis under. So what you can really feel and focus on is the tucking of the lower abs, tucking the pelvis on the right as we push forward with the right palm. That is the push position. When we're doing the push and grasp the sparrow's tail, it's going to come following this position here. This is press. When we're doing press, we have the same motion of the core all working on the same side. We have the upper waist turning away from the active hip, lower waist or lower abs turning towards the active hip. But instead of extending using the glutes, the hip action is flexion. We're pulling forward from the hip flexors here in the front of the hip. That is what creates press. Then we convert press to push by taking that hip flexion and changing it to hip extension. And then now we have our first real push. My upper waist is turning forward on this side, on the right, even though it looks like the hands are parallel. I'm tucking using my lower abs on the right, and I'm extending my right hip. Now I'm going to reverse all of those core energies and do them on the left side, extending from the left hip and then using the core waist muscles on the left. That is going to push me back, pushing the palms down. If instead of doing that, I switch the core waist muscles, but I flex my left hip instead of extending the left hip, that is what's going to retreat me back in this fashion. And then we push forward with the core action on the right, extending my right hip and then using the core waist muscles on the right. So that is the push, and I also went through the press. Now I'm going to backtrack a little bit and go through the ward off and the rollback. So in ward off, the trigram has 3 unbroken lines representing yang energy, which is more of a offensive sort of energy, a confrontational sort of energy. And I'll explain how we can see that in the core mechanics as we do ward off, which is this motion here. We are doing something similar to push. In push, I extended my right hip, lower abs were turning back into the right. All that serves to push the body off the ground, but the upper waist was turning away from the extending hip, causing the projection of the right palm. In ward off, we are turning both the upper and lower waist towards the extending hip. And instead of this push action, you get this action where my left arm is now bowed outward by the rotation of the upper waist against the rotation of the lower waist, against the extending hip, all turning back towards the ground, all projecting energy off the ground. And that is what creates this solid structure of the bowed out arm in ward off. Very difficult to break this structure because it has to do with the waist rotating here, and hip pushing off the ground. All of those structural components are aligned, creating the circular energy and upward energy of ward off that is very hard to overcome. So that is happening right here. Then I'm going to take my upper and lower waist for the transition to roll back, and I'm going to turn both the upper and lower waist to the left at the same time. So now my upper waist is turning counterclockwise, my lower abs are turning counterclockwise, I'm tucked on the left, my root is on the left here. That's the transition. And then to do roll back, which is 3 yin broken lines, I'm going to flex my left hip, and that is going to create this movement here as I roll back. So roll back is a very deceptive movement because a lot of people do it thinking that they're turning the waist to the right, turning like that. But that is not the trigram energy of rollback. In rollback, we have 3 broken yin lines, meaning instead of hip extension, we have hip flexion. And then we have upper and lower waist turning into the flexing hip. All of that creates rotational energy, which is retreating in the effect. If I were to do this standing up, walking backwards, I rotate my upper and lower waist into a flexing hip, and it causes me to walk backward instead of walking forward. So that is a very retreating sort of motion. When we do it in roll back from this setup, it creates this action, but it's really the same thing. I'm turning the whole core into this flexing hip. The body retreats away and across, but that may appear to some people like we're turning to the right, but we're really turning to the left as this happens. The root is on the left, which is why when you do roll back, it's going to be difficult for somebody to push you over because my leg is rooted to the ground by the rotation of the lower abs, sticking that left foot onto the ground so nobody can knock me over. To finish up the lesson today, I'm going to go through Grasp the Sparrow's Tail from the side view and talk you through not only the 4 energies that I've already explained that are already explicitly called out in Grasp the Sparrow's Tail, those of ward off, roll back, press, and push, but I'm going to show you where the other movements in Grasp the Sparrow's Tail are. The other 4 energies represented by the 8 trigrams of Tai Chi. To do this, I'm going to switch the entrance up a little bit to the one we do in the Tai Chi 108 form, because that's where we're going to see all 8 of the energies. I'm not going to go through the core movements in detail. You can check out my other videos where I talk about the core movements and all of the 8 techniques explicitly. But right now, I'm just going to show you where they are. In the 108 form, we begin here, and we actually step out in the opposite direction from the 24 form. I'm going to step out onto the heel, and then we're going to do ward off, but it occurs in 2 components. First is pluck, then ward off. Then I'm going to step up, creating the ball carrying position. This is going to require 2 techniques. First, elbow strike to bring the arm across, and then split to square the body up. Now we're going to step out using press onto the heel. From press, I'm going to engage the lower abs now on the left, turning press into elbow strike. And then now we have ward off. Turn the upper and lower waist to the opposite side, which turns ward off into shoulder strike. Then keeping the upper and lower waist in the same orientation and flexing the right hip turns shoulder strike into roll back. Then I'm going to switch the lower abs, turning roll back into split. Then change the upper abs, changing split into elbow strike. And then now we have press, which I already explained, push with extension of the left hip, push with extension of the right hip, and then push with extension of the left hip. Then we're going to shift back using split, turn around using shoulder strike, and then we go back into the vertical ball carrying position, step out onto the heel, roll it up, ward off, transition to roll back, and transition to press, push, push, and push. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. In the next lesson, we'll be transitioning from grasp the sparrow's tail to cloud hands.